Okay, my name is Larry McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Kimmy Cook of the Alliance for Just Philadelphia to discuss the recently passed city budget. Lance Haver will discuss how private equity impacts healthcare, and Vanessa Maria Graber will report on last weekend's No Kings protest. Denise, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. And so we're done city council until September.
Well, yes, we're done with the formal meetings, but I'm sure that we'll get dragged into a hearing or two over the summer.
Yeah, I think we will this year. And there's even though it's calm right now on the city council front, there's still a lot going on. One of the key things, and I just want to put this in everybody's ear so we can keep an eye on it together. We've been told that the bond initiative, the $800 million bond initiative, the $400 million, the first tranche, will be this summer, probably next month.
Yeah, I'd heard July.
Yeah. So what's going to be really interesting about that for us, we want to know how much of that money is going to be spent as soon as possible. We've raised this concern because we don't want the money sitting in a bank paying debt service on money you're not using. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's paying $25 million.
Denise, it looks like she cut out there a little bit. But that's true. Paying $25 million a year on money you're not going to use really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to keep an eye on that. And we'll be talking more about that as we go. So hopefully we'll be able to report on that maybe next month, at least the first part of that. So now I'd like to bring on Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So Vanessa, tell people where you were this weekend.
This weekend, I was in Center City, Philadelphia, along the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, reporting on the No Kings protests. Philadelphia was the flagship protest, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of protests planned all across the country.
All right. And in Philadelphia, the estimate was about 80,000 people.
It was actually 100,000 people.
Okay. So more than they even thought was going to come out.
Yeah, that's correct. And it was raining, so it didn't seem to deter the crowds.
What was the mood?
Well, I have a video to show you where I asked that question, but I can tell you that even though it was pretty gloomy and raining out, there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of really clever signs, as you know, I would expect from people in Philadelphia and the surrounding area. Lots of artwork, lots of flags, because of course it was Flag Day, and lots of people, who were eager to be in community and a public square with other folks who were like-minded.
All right. Well, let's take a look at that report right now, Vanessa.
Hey, this is Vanessa Maria Graber reporting for WPPM and the Pacifica Radio Network and the Hall Monitor Show. And right now I'm in downtown Philadelphia, where the No Kings rally and march is taking place. There are tens of thousands of people gathered in front of me and behind me, as you can see, who are attending a rally at the Art Museum. This march was organized by Indivisible and the 5051 campaign, and there are people from all over the area who have come here to oppose the policies of President Donald Trump. In Washington, D.C., there is a large military parade happening to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the military and President Trump's birthday. And to counter that, there are tens of thousands of people here and all across the nation, where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of gatherings planned, again, to oppose the policies of the sitting president and his administration.
When we stand up and when we stand together and when we refuse to bow, we can build a movement to save the heart and soul of America. Stood with him. right here in Philadelphia, black and white, refused to bow to the king-like rule of chattel slavery and slave masters. A fourth force stood with them. When women, black and white, refused to bow to those who didn't want them to vote, a fourth force stood with them. When segregationists and Jim Crow politicians lips dripped with the words of interposition and nullification, people like Rosa Parks and Viola LaRussa and Fannie Lou and Martin and Rabbi Heschel, men and women of every birth, refused to bow, and a fourth force stood with them. And I tell you, the force of truth and the force of love and the force of equality and the force of justice is more powerful than any would-be king named Trump or MAGA or anything. To stand together like never before, because when we all get together, we have the power to reconstruct American democracy. Did you know that if just 20% of us, if we organize 20% of the non-voters in the last election, especially poor and low-wage voters who couldn't see how casting a ballot could make a difference in their lives, if we can organize them, we can upend the whole political calculus.
My name is Serafina Ferrero. I'm a lifelong member of the Philadelphia community, and I'm out here protesting the rise of authoritarianism and oligarchy and the absolute horror show that is our American justice system at this point for not standing up against Trump and his cronies. It's really terrible.
What are you most concerned about?
The ongoing genocide in Palestine really deeply concerns me, and the arrests and the violence happening in Los Angeles are the two things that I, am just completely stunned by at this point. Yeah.
What's the crowd and what are the vibes like today?
The vibes are great. Everybody that's out here is like, just really focused. Some of us are being very silly. Some of us are being very serious. Everybody's participating, keeping each other safe. People handing me free water as we're walking. It's a really good group out here today.
What do you think the message the world needs to hear today?
That our government doesn't speak for us as Americans, that we actually invite and welcome all immigrant families, that we are a place of brotherly love and community here in Philadelphia, and nobody's allowed to mess with you here. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on what's happening across the country in Los Angeles and all the No Kings protests that are planned for today?
I think it's amazing. I think, showing up for events like this when there's a large movement is a really great way to direct your energy. Not only does it help to see all these people in the streets, but it makes you feel more active and less afraid. And I think it's really important that we feel active and less afraid in this America right now. Yeah.
And finally, what do you hope will happen going forward?
Honestly, I'm just really hoping that some of the people in power start hearing what we're saying, and that these people don't represent us, and that we don't want this kind of violence, that we don't want, military activated in our cities, that we want to welcome immigrants, that we want peace in Palestine, that we want all of these things. And their job is to represent us. Their job is not to serve their own interests. So that's what I'm really hoping for, and I go to bed hoping for that every day.
Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad you're out here. Yeah.
Those serfs, those of us who aspire and attain to public office, are nothing but the servants of the people. And the moment that somebody in public office begins to act like the master of the people, that is the moment to evict, eject, reject, impeach, try, convict, and start over again. Under Article 1, President Trump, your job is simple: to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. That's it. In the monarchies, Tom Paine said, the king is the law, but in the democracies and the free societies, the law is king. You didn't get that memo, did you, Mr. President? You've been violating the law. You've been trampling the law. You've been ignoring the law, acting as if it's irrelevant to the only thing that matters, which is your own wealth and power. What if Thomas Jefferson were here? What if Abraham Lincoln were here? What would they say? They would say, cut it out. Stop violating the rights of the people. Stop trespassing on the powers of Congress. Stop staging provocations against the members of Congress and other parts of the government stop violating the orders of the courts.
I'm Susan Brown, and I'm here from Minnesota to support the protest against Trump. He is just, he's a horrible, horrible man, and you know, he's a racist, a rapist, a felon, and we elected him. I mean, who are the people that think he's okay? I'm just so discouraged. What he's done with women's rights, what he's doing with the immigrants, the tariffs, it's all bad. And I think he is just trying to ruin the country, just so he can walk in and take over.
I see you have the book on tyranny in your hand. Is that something you're concerned about?
Yes, absolutely. He's one step away from being a dictator. Everything he's done so far has been illegal. He shouldn't be putting the Marines on American ground. He shouldn't be having the National Guard, you know, against protesters. And they were saying on the news that, you know, if in some Republicans were saying, if you come here and you protest, you know, one guy said he was going to kill him. You know, why did all this hatred have to come to the surface? I mean, I've always been peaceful. I've always loved America. I'm not a hater of America. I'm the real American. He's not.
And what is the vibe? What's your sense of how things are going today?
I think it's fabulous. I'm so happy to see so many people here. And we drove a long way to get here. So this is real gratifying. And it gives me hope. Sometimes I get so down in the dumps and depressed. It's just nice to see there are people who share my view and know that this is wrong.
And what do you hope will happen after this going forward?
I hope that the Republicans in government wake up and start doing their job. Trump needs to be impeached. So does J.D. Vance. So does half the Supreme Court. I mean, the three that came on with Trump last time, those three justices, they lied in their confirmation hearings. And Clarence Thomas should never have gotten on the bench, and he should be impeached. And so I want the Republicans to stop kissing butt and do what's right. Do what America is about.
All right, lastly, what's the message you think the world needs to hear today?
That America does not like Trump either. So please, please don't hate us.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you.
To be standing here with a champion of Pennsylvanians, a lifelong Philadelphian, and the executive director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania, Mike Lee.
What up, Philly? I said, what up, Philly? When I say free, you say speech. Free. Speech. Free. Speech. Free. Speech. Free. Speech. That's what's up. That's what's up. That's Philly right there. Hi, my name is Mike Lee. I'm the executive director of ACLU of Pennsylvania. Proud Philadelphian, born and raised. Happy Pride Month. Happy early Father's Day. Happy democracy. Cities across this country standing up, pushing back against President Trump and his enablers while they try to pull out all the stops unconstitutionally, trying to scare us, put us on our heels, knock the Democratic breath out of us. They even trying to do it here in Philly, threatening funding cuts if we don't change our local policies, deportation without due process. Ooh. Troops in our streets. But guess what? You messing with the wrong city. You seen our local government? You seen our elected officials? We here to stand up and push back. Philly, as you've heard throughout today, We're known for our fighting spirit and our brotherly love. And 2-time Super Bowl champion Eagles. But let me tell y'all real quick, while these are called the Rocky Steps, it's not because of how many people Rocky knocked down, it's because of how many times he stood up. Against the odds, he stood up. Stand up, fight back, right? So, when they try to give us a parade, no, we want Medicaid. We're gonna stand up. Don't give us a statue. They're for tourists. We love the grind. That's why we talk about these steps. That's why we bring our champions to these steps, because we respect and love the grind, the underdog. It doesn't matter what the odds are. We're here to fight peacefully and do so in a constitutional way, because that's what it's all about. Last thing, Philly, last thing. Only love can drive out the hate that we're seeing. I see love here. And just remember, when you're in Philly, sometimes love hurts.
Well, my name is Charito Morales, and I'm decided because in the United States of America, we have no kings, and I'm here to support every single immigrant that comes to this country, and especially in Philadelphia.
Tell us about your experience today.
It was a great experience. Everything went smooth. We have a lot of speakers. Everybody's behaved, so we're having a fun time. A lot of lectures from all our speakers.
What are you most concerned about?
I'm concerned that people walk out and a lot of people act up, or maybe the police get kind of out of hand. But unfortunately, I hope everything stays the same it is. Cool. First, what happened in Los Angeles is abuse of power. They're using the power to scare the people. We have the freedom of speech. What happened in the country today is because we have no king in America, and everybody's fighting for the democracy and freedom of speech.
What would you like to see happen moving forward?
What happens going forward? I don't want to see people being kidnapped on the way to school, on the way to the appointment in the hospital. I believe that everybody has the opportunity to a due process, and that's what we want to see. Everybody belongs here. This country was made by immigrants, and it should stay like that.
What do you want the mayor and the city officials to do?
Well, the mayor is not doing anything for us. She just show up. What we want her to do? Get out of the Philadelphia and have somebody who actually is speaking for us and willing to work for us. Wow, what the people need to hear around the world is that we are united, we fighting back, we're telling people that we're not gonna stay quiet and we're gonna keep pushing forward.
Charito, thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me, and happy Flag Day, 250 years of America.
We finished our nonviolent action. I guarantee you, truth will win. Justice will win. Equality will win. Justice will win. And on that day, we will under God, indivisible,
All right, you heard it here. This is Vanessa Maria, and I'm downtown, just finishing up the No Kings protest. Went off without a hitch. There was I don't think there's any arrests. I didn't see anything. No issues, very calm, very peaceful. People are now going home. There's no trash here. Like I said, the police are just chilling out. And this was amidst the rain and the craziness of the news all week. So shout out to Philly and everybody that came here. It really was super successful. There probably was 100,000 people here. We'll find out the exact count later when we see all the aerial photos. But do tune in to WPPM 106.5 FM on Wednesday at 6. You can listen to my full report on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor Show. But until next time, it's Vanessa Maria. Talk to you later.
All right, Vanessa, do we still have you there? There we go. So some of the criticism you hear is, well, why do people do this, and what's the point? I think that it serves an important purpose, especially with this administration. When that number of people get together, people notice. And when you're talking about the Trump administration, a group of bullies, the only thing they respond to is people standing up to them. And that's why I think events like this are so important.
Yeah, there's an estimated 12.1 million people that attended No Kings protests across the country. That's according to Indivisible. When you look at the map on their website on where events were being planned, it was really all over. My brother was vacationing in upstate New York in a very small town, and he sent me a video. He said, look, they're even protesting here in a very rural area. So I do think it's important to see that visual, right? Especially that's why I ask people, what is your message to people around the world? I think a lot of people wanted to show like, hey, we're not all supporting the policies of the current administration. Protests like this, they're definitely heavily scrutinized, and there's been a lot of opinions all over social media. And I want to say that a lot of the people that I talked to, it was their first protests that they had ever been to. And so I think that's noteworthy. And quite a few people said that the events unfolding in Los Angeles, things that the raids with the immigrants, on all the events that have happened since Trump got elected, motivated them to come to a protest for the first time. A lot of people were looking for ways to organize and plug in. There was lots of representatives from local organizations giving out information on how to sign up for groups, how to get involved, how to take action. And I think something that's still really important, especially in Philadelphia, right, is this concept of a public square, right? People coming together to discuss politics, to discuss current events, to exchange ideas. And you saw a lot of people talking amongst each other, people, wanting to have a safe place where they can give their thoughts and opinions. And for some people, they might be the only one in their household who cares about these issues. So coming to an event like this, they can find other people that are also concerned, and they can get more information, and they can get plugged into other organizing that's happening. Certainly, these protests are not the thing that are going to maybe end these policies, but more like one of the things that plugs people into other organizing, to political education, to media literacy, and many other things that will help them get involved in social movements that have been proven to effective to stop harmful policies.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that report, Vanessa. And, there's going to be a lot more, I think, coming down the pike. So there's going to be a lot more opportunities for people to participate in events like this, and they're needed. They're sorely needed.
Yeah, it was great to be on the scene there. We were part of a national broadcast with the Pacifica Radio Network. So shout out to Pacifica. We were representing WPPM. And so it's always fun to represent Philly and, to be amongst other reporters at community radio stations like ours, reporting on similar issues. So as I like to say, I'll see you out in the streets at the next one.
All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And now we're going to play our interview with Kimmy Cook of the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia as we discuss what a fair budget would look like for the city of Philadelphia. So here's our interview with Kimmy Cook. All right, Kimmy Cook of Alliance for a Just Philadelphia. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia, and the kind of work you do?
Yeah, so the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia is a coalition of over 3 dozen organizations across Philadelphia. We are community organizations, nonprofits, advocacy groups, worker organizations, and we come together to build power and fight for a Philadelphia where we can all thrive and not just survive. And so a lot of our work looks around advocacy at City Hall. So obviously the budget is a big one for us. And we also, do advocacy around electoral campaigns, not specifically endorsements, but just like making sure people are informed about the candidates. And yeah, so I know we're here talking about the budget today. That's a lot of where our advocacy is focused each year.
And I do recommend people take a look at your website and learn more about what your organization does, because it is great work. Let's talk a little bit about this budget. And I guess the first thing I'd like to ask you about, the budget process, at least publicly, starts in March. when the mayor makes the budget address. It goes up until last week, really, in the middle of June, when it finally gets passed. In your opinion, how did this budget change from its inception to what we finally passed last week?
Great question, because there was an Inquirer article actually this morning that I think highlights some of that. But basically, the budget that was introduced back in March by the mayor during her budget address isn't too different than what the final passage is. There are some amendments that came through. Some district council members got, funding for capital projects, et cetera. But a lot of the mayor's agenda, as she wanted it, did pass through exactly as it was proposed.
And it seems to me what kind of happened is, you had the budget that we saw in March, and then for a lot of things that maybe had been contentious, it seems like they just took money out of the fund balance and said, okay, we're going to put what turned out to be an extra $98 million into the budget for different things that maybe otherwise would have been reduced or something like that. So it was interesting that that's the way it happened. The other thing is, and tell me if your perception of this is what I'm saying. It seems to me that probably 90 to 95% of the budget might already be accounted for before we even sit down, because there's so many obligations the city has to make. And what you find is that, at least from my experience, council and the mayor's office really arguing over about 5 or 10%. Is that how you see it?
Honestly, no. We do know that there's a large portion of the budget that, does not change. It already has either it's by law or other means that it doesn't really shift. But we really prioritize the pieces that we can move, including, mainly the operating budget is what we look at each year. So that's what's funding our public services that we prioritize in getting them fully funded. So while that is true, we actually do think that small amount is actually still quite a bit, quite a bit of funding. And so I would say that's not usually our framing, even though we do understand that that is kind of a dynamic at play.
Sure. So what were some of the things that your organization was lobbying council on to try to get into this budget or to get more funding for?
Yeah, so each year the Alliance puts out a people's budget. It's our budget platform of our demands. And those demands come from member organizations that are anchoring specific campaigns, whether they're, advocating for certain funding for certain departments or less funding in certain departments. And so this year we had quite a long list of demands that, again, were all anchored by different organizations that we work with. And I'll just, it's kind of long. I'll just highlight a couple and feel free to ask.
Take your time. Take your time.
But I have my list here that I'll go through so I don't miss anything. Our top demand this year was no tax cuts for big businesses, no cuts to the BERT or the wage tax, and don't codify those tax cuts for 13 years, which is how the plan had been written and did indeed pass. A couple other more of the spending side of things for our demands are immigrant community resources. So we were looking for $1.8 million, an increase to by $1.8 million to support the Defenders Association, or PIFUP, the Philadelphia Immigrant Family Unity Project. And then we also were asking for almost $2 million, $1.9 million for newcomer programs in the Philly school district. So those are programs where children that are immigrants coming to Philly and attending public school have extra resources to support them in that process. So that's kind of what we were hoping to get for immigrant communities, especially in this moment as the federal government has been attacking those communities. We did not get either of those demands met. We also were advocating for safe, healthy homes. So we were advocating for a $10 million increase to the licenses and inspection department, specifically to launch a proactive inspection program for rental code enforcement. We know a lot of landlords are negligent, and often low-income renters do deal with all sorts of housing issues. I'm a renter myself, so I've dealt with some of them. Thankfully, I don't have any nightmare stories, but whether it's leaky roofs or rodents, et cetera.
Well, people should know that the city really doesn't even inspect rental properties.
Exactly. Right. So, and there was also matching legislation to go along with our funding demand in the budget, which I'm happy to get into a little bit later to kind of tackle it from both a legislative and just a funding perspective of like, what do we actually need to have, our rental properties inspected, not just proactively, but also especially if people are putting in complaints, but often that doesn't happen or it takes months to happen already. And then we also were advocating for $10 million for the Philadelphia Energy Authority's Built to Last program. Last year, we advocated for $5 million and we received that. This is a home repair program as well for low-income homeowners and other clean and energy initiatives through the PEA. This budget demand, we're not quite sure where it landed yet because it might come through. We're not sure all what the home initiative will include for Built to Last, but we do think some funding will come through in that. We also have a lot of demands under public health and not over policing. So every year for a very long time, the operating budget for Philly is around a third of it is used for police department, prisons department, and other policing measures, which is quite a significant portion compared to some of our other services like the free library or Parks and Rec department. So we're always advocating for not adding to that bloated budget already, and ideally starting to defund that program and support it, instead supporting through non-carceral approaches to public safety. So for instance, our biggest campaign in this category is demanding an increase in funding for our mobile crisis units. And those are trained mental health responders that instead of police coming to the scene, if you call 911, if you or someone you're with is experiencing a mental health crisis, instead of cops coming that generally don't have, a trained approach to dealing with mental health crises and often resort to violence or just ways that don't de-escalate the situation. These mobile crisis units do. They have a social worker with them, an EMT, and we are advocating for more funding for those mobile crisis units, which we did not receive. And there's some other things in that category as well, but I think I'll skip down to worker justice. Another one of our big campaigns was asking for an increase in the Office of Worker Protections. And that office is a part of the Labor Department. And that's really important because that office is really the first stop for folks that don't have, they're not non-unionized workers that don't have union protections, but they're being exploited in the workplace, such as whether it's wage theft or something worse, some other type of exploitation. Maybe it's like they don't offer contracts and materials in the language that the worker speaks, things like that. And so this is really common amongst domestic workers, temp workers, folks that aren't maybe in like a traditional industry that are unionized. And so that office has about one staff person for almost every 200,000 cases, which similar to like the L&I thing is there's just not enough staff to be able to address complaints. So I think I'll pause there, or maybe the last thing I'll say is we also always advocate for fully funding our public services, such as the free library, parks and recreation, public health, streets, schools, the broad category of things that keep our city running and that our residents rely on.
So what it sounds like to me is, from your perspective, this budget falls short in a lot of areas.
Yes. So of all the things I just listed, we actually didn't receive any funding for those things, any increase in funding, which is, especially in this moment that we're in, given the threats coming from the federal government, we're really dismayed to see that we don't feel like our city leadership is taking that seriously and not, fulfilling the obligation to serve their constituents and fully fund these public services that we all rely on.
Does the budget get anything right? Or are there some things in there that you look at and say, okay, well, that's a good start?
Great question. Unfortunately, not so much this year. We are interested to see what comes out of the home initiative. I think there will be really important programs housed in that, and that's separate from the budget, but also part of what passed during the budget season. And the mayor did, the council did approve the mayor's request for $800 million in bonds to pay for this very robust program. And I do think there are things in there that are really good, like eviction diversion funding and the built to last and certain home repairs and things. So I think we're looking forward to learning more about that in particular, especially our housing advocate groups, and seeing what good is in that. I think otherwise, the only very small increase in program that we are excited about that we saw is CPOC, the Community Police Oversight Commission. Not fully, you'll have to double check me on that acronym, but there was a small increase in funding for that, which, under our demands that fall under the anti-policing and anti-violent approaches to care, we do want to have more oversight for the police department. And so it was very small, but it is something that did go through. But otherwise, this budget to us is really not good overall.
So, not including the items you had mentioned, but if you had a wish list for ways the city could use the budget to help alleviate poverty, what would some of those things be?
I think first and foremost is to have progressive tax policies. And I won't get too in depth because I know you're interviewing someone else that will go more in depth about those things, but we need robust revenue to be able to fund all of these public services. And right now, the way taxes are set up in Philly, it is quite wonky, but it does, prioritize tax cuts for the largest corporations, tax cuts for the richest folks in the city. And while we might have a flat tax rate for those things because of the uniformity clause at the state level, a flat rate is regressive, right? Because it does not support the working class. It does not support low-income renters or homeowners in, being able to bring in the city revenue from the richest in the city, who often evade taxes and get a lot of tax breaks already at the state and federal level, who don't have a uniformity clause in place. The working class is paying the brunt of that. The burden falls on them. They don't have their needs met. They're not getting any tax breaks. And so we see folks like, Comcast CEO and Aramark and these mega corporations. I'm not talking about small or even medium-sized businesses. We're talking about, these massive corporations that hold so much wealth in our city, not paying their fair share. And so first and foremost, to get an equitable budget, a true people's budget, we need to bring in the funding to be able to fund these public services that keep us safe.
What can people do to help advocate for a more beneficial budget for everybody, but specifically the people who are struggling to get by? What can people do to help with that?
I think now more than ever, it's time to get organized, right? Between what's going on at the federal level and what's trickling down to the city level. We need to build power to be able to fight against these kind of status quo narratives that tax cuts will uplift folks out of poverty and all these old ideas that have never really played out in reality for decades. So my advice is talk to your neighbors, build trust amongst your community. If you don't already have a political organizational home, find one. You can reach out to me. We have many organizations in the Alliance that might be a good fit for you. And so, now more than ever is the time to just continue building that community power, whether or not you're already super engaged. There are small things you can do, even while, there's not active activity at City Hall this summer, to really continue to fight for yourself and for your neighbors.
And how can people reach out to you and the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia?
Yes, great question. You can reach out to me personally not at my personal account, but at my personal work account, at kimmy@ajustphiladelphia.org. That's the best way. I'm happy to have a conversation with you if this is kind of piquing your interest, but you're not sure where to go next. I can get some more information from you and what you're interested in fighting for, what issues you care about, and I can support with kind of maybe offering some resources or direction of other folks you can connect with and communities you can tap into.
All right, Kimmy Cook, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. We'd like to thank Kimmy Cook for joining us on the program. And we will have more budget coverage next week when friend of the show, Stan Shapiro, will be on to talk about the tax portion of the budget and what that looks like. So you're not going to want to miss that. It's a great conversation. I'd like to bring back Denise Clay-Murray here. And our own Lance Hafer to talk a little bit about what private equity is doing to healthcare. Lance, walk us through that.
Well, good evening, and great show as always. It's not great news about the budget, but at least it's news and we know what's in it. However many pages, the backroom deals and everything else, at least people have an idea. So I'm gonna start my report with a very simple question. Who owns your doctor's office? You go to see your doctor. Maybe if you're lucky, your doctor spends 5 minutes with you, 10 minutes with you. Maybe they order tests. Maybe they order blood tests. Maybe they do some tests in the room. So who owns your doctor's office? Well, the answer for most of us is I have no idea. How would I know? Who tells me? My doctor says we're part of the Jefferson Network. Well, what does that actually mean? And what it means, unfortunately, is the old Norman Rockwell type doctors are very rare now. Most of the time what we see is either a hospital or a private equity company owning the doctor's offices. And the more specialized the doctor is, an anesthesiologist, an OBGYN, a dermatologist, orthopedist, most of them are actually owned by very wealthy people getting together and buying up the practice. And the practice is then controlled not by the doctor, not by the nurse practitioner, but by the owner of the practice. And we're often confused. Why do they do this? Why would private equity step in and buy up hospitals and doctor offices and specialty offices? How do they make money when we're told that all the hospitals are losing money and the doctor's offices are losing money? So to try and provide that background, I've got a PowerPoint presentation I'd like to go over. And this focuses on what's happened in Delaware County, where what we've seen is the hospitals that were bought up by a for-profit company and now have closed. So if the hospitals really are struggling, why would a for-profit company do it? And I'm going to walk people through the steps. So this is a particular company. We're going to see how wealthy they got in another slide, but this is what they do. They buy the company, and the first thing they do when they buy the hospital is they borrow money. In this case, it was more than one hospital. They borrowed $1.1 billion. Now, because bankers, when they lend money, want to make money, they don't just say, okay, we lent you the money and now you don't have to pay it back. They say you have to pay it back. But the money is gone. The $1.1 billion wasn't invested in the hospital. It didn't buy more medical machinery. It didn't buy more land. It was used to pay dividends to the people who invested in it. And so they took all of that money they borrowed and they gave it to the company. In this case, it's Leonard Green and the minority owners of Prospect Hospitals. And they got away with all of that money and they left the hospital in $1.1 billion worth of debt. And where's the money go? Well, here it is. Now, again, this is Leonard Green, who's the principal owner of Prospects, and they have minority owners as well. And one of the things I want to make a point of saying is there's a reason why it's private equity. Unlike a stockholder-owned company, which has a prospectus, which has to file papers, which people can look at and say, I see what the dividends are, or I see what's going on. Private equity, privately held companies don't have the same reporting legalities, responsibilities. They can just decide not to pay any and not to tell people what's going on. So here, I'm going to pause after this slide and just go over it one more time. So again, they borrowed $1.2 billion. And of course, anyone who owns the company has to pay themselves a management fee. So every year they paid themselves $1 million management fee. Now that's pretty good. They owned it for 9 years. It's $9 million. But of course, most of us can see that there may be some value in getting somebody to own something and paying them a management fee. And then there's a transaction fee. It's kind of like what Denise was talking about when her brother went to buy the car, right? The undercoating, the wheel coverings, the rugs in the back, the merger transition accusation fees, the advertising fees, whatever you want to call them. But that's almost $4.5 million. Then there's the dividend. And that dividend was only $188 million. Now, again, most of us think of dividends as something a corporation pays when a corporation makes money, or a company pays, an LLC, limited liability company, pays when that company makes money. But it turns out when private equity buys something, they can just declare a dividend and send it out. So they gave themselves $188 million. And then, what the heck? In 2018, they all needed new yachts. So they gave themselves another $457 million in dividend. All of this is while the hospitals are struggling, they're going broke. And again, it was more than just in Delaware County, it was in 4 states. But I'm just talking specifically about Pennsylvania because the governor in Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, has not only said that the Republican-controlled legislature should fund SEPTA and public transit across the state, he's asked the Republicans in the legislature to protect hospitals and doctors' offices from these predatory practices of private equity. And we're going to see, much like the funding for public transit, that has fallen on deaf ears as well. So even though this company's bought hospitals in 4 different states, I'm focusing on Pennsylvania and Crozer Medical. And it's not just Crozer. There were 4 distinct hospitals, and they closed them over a number of years. But right now, they're all closed. They're all done. Everybody is without. So Leonard Green and his minority partners have taken $658,441,000 out of the hospitals. Well, of course, the hospitals can't pay that. So what do? How do they figure out what to do? Well, many hospitals, an example of this was Hahnemann Hospital, which those of us in Philadelphia know, is at right at Broad and Vine Street, very nice piece of real estate. Hahnemann was the oldest hospital in Philadelphia. It was originally a homeopathic hospital, which is a different part of the conversation, but it was a very old hospital. It was doing okay. It was bought up again by a private equity company and driven into bankruptcy. And now the building itself is sitting on a very nice piece of real estate and not far from the convention center. It's going to be turned into office space or condos or something else. And the land is going to be worth a fair amount. So this is what happens. How does the hospital pay off the debt? Well, they sell the land. And who do they sell the land to? Well, they sell the land back to the people who bankrupted them. So the private equity company sets up another company that buys the land, pays its own debt to itself so that the hospital doesn't owe any debt anymore, but now it doesn't have any land. So now it has to pay rent. But of course, when it's a hospital, when it's tens of millions of dollars, we don't call it rent, right? We say it's a lease. And we don't say, hey, they just cheated us. We say, no, this is a sale leaseback transaction. And what's on the screen, what you can see, if you're watching Philly Cam, you're watching us on television, you can see it's really a very simple thing. And in some ways, it's absolutely brilliant. It's just one of those things where what you have to do is look at it and go, if only these people were on our side, if only these people were focused on finding ways to deliver affordable health care for everyone, we'd be in such better shape, because who dreams of doing this? What kind of evil brilliance says, well, I'm going to buy a hospital, borrow money, bankrupt the hospital, sell the land to myself, and then make the hospital pay me rent for the land I took from them? You have to be really a brilliant person with no conscience and no morals to do this. But that's what they do. And again, they call it a sale leaseback. So the hospital borrows the money, can't pay it back, has to sell the land, sells the land to the people who own the hospital in a different form, a REIT, and then the hospital pays the rent back. So let me stop there and see if you think I've made those points clear enough for everyone.
Well, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the deal with the 76ers in the stadium downtown, where the city owned the land, or the Sixers would buy the land and they give it back to the city after a certain point. And this is all very confusing. And what makes it bad is it's a very necessary service at a time where you now have to go further for healthcare, because the hospitals that you need, that you used to be able to rely on, are no longer there.
I think those are excellent points. It's not just the hospitals, it's the 76ers. The reason why people my age bracket who grew up shopping at Sears can't shop at Sears anymore is they did the same thing. Private equity company comes in, buys up Toys R Us, buys up Sears, borrows lots of money, can't pay the debt, sells the land, makes the store pay the lease, and then the store goes bankrupt. Everyone loses jobs, neighborhoods lose anchor institutions, and more of us are limited in our choices and end up shopping online. And we consolidate more and more wealth in fewer and fewer hands.
And this just goes back to one of, I think, the central tenets of why we do this show. You know, the private acquisition of public needs for a profit, it has been destructive in any community where anything like that has happened. We see it with the water department. We would see it with the gas company if it wasn't for a man named Lance Haver 20-some years ago who helped stop that.
It's kind of you to say, but it was Council President Clark who stopped it. I was there.
Yeah,
with him,
well, you were there.
But I was there, but Council President wouldn't even introduce the Nutter bill. He had the back. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of those elected officials who had backbones, in part because it costs so much money to run for election now. And I think we're going to see that not a single member of city council is going to have a backbone to stand up to the SEPTA board when SEPTA decides it's going to cut 40% of the service in the city transit division before it even thinks about touching the regional rail lines.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's eluding, and it's the type of thing that happens because we are often fooled into believing that private companies can run things more efficiently. And when it comes to the word efficient, it's not goal neutral. You know, what makes something more efficient? Well, certainly if you don't service poor people, if you don't provide basic necessities, if you throw people out of the hospital or don't even admit them, well, I guess that's more efficient, maybe for the people that own the hospital. But of course, if you're the person denied health care, if you're the person who watches a loved one suffer, if you're the person who has to go back time and time again, it's not more efficient for you. So efficiency is not goal neutral. It's not something that we share. The question is, what is the goal? And the goal for the private equity companies, and again, there's nothing wrong with, I don't believe there's anything wrong with a business that says we're going into business to make money. There's something wrong when that business says we're going to make money by depriving people of a basic human need, healthcare. So just going back, because we're going to get to the last part of the conversation. This is what they do. A private equity is nothing but a bunch of rich people getting together and putting their money together. They buy up a hospital, a doctor's office, anything. They borrow money against what they just bought. The hospital, doctor's office can't pay it, so they do one of three things, or all of them. One, they sell the land they're on, and then they force the hospital or the doctor's office to pay rent. Two, they cut back on services, or three, they raise prices, or they do some combination of all of them. So this is what happened. This is why people in Delaware County are now faced with a huge problem if they have an emergency, having to go farther away. And the sad news, and it's really something that we know, and again, this is what makes it so heartbreaking. We know that people who have strokes have a limited amount of time to get the medicine that dissolves the clot. And we know if we can get people into that emergency room in a certain amount of time, that they will recover fully. Not all of them, 90%. I mean, obviously, it's not always good news. You can't expect always to have good news. But we know that if we get most people into the emergency room in a reasonable amount of time, they will recover fully from the stroke. We also know that if we don't get people into the emergency room in a timely fashion, the parts of the brain that don't have blood coming to it will die and cannot be brought back. It's not a broken bone that heals. It's not a torn tendon that can be operated on. It is something that will never be replaced. And not only is it human suffering and heartbreaking, it's also exceedingly expensive to care for stroke victims, to care for people who could have been fine had we kept the hospital and emergency room open and gotten them into those doors in time. So this is what's happening. Now, Governor Shapiro, to his credit, and again, I want to make sure everyone understands because I'm not a big fan. Governor Shapiro was very quick to fix I-95 where the wealthy people, the richer people commute by car back and forth into Center City, but he's been very slow to preserve SEPTA. But Governor Shapiro has called for an investigation into these private equity transactions. The Republicans have refused to do anything. And here's the quote. The state Senate has made no such commitment. However, Majority Leader Joe Pittman from Indiana County, a Republican, said he was intrigued by Shapiro's comments on private equity-driven hospital mergers in February, and given, quote, the crisis facing numerous hospitals across the Commonwealth, the measure is certainly worthy of further conversations. That's what he said. There have been no further conversations. Private equity companies are buying up doctors' offices. The private equity companies tell the doctors how long they can stay with the patient. They have them order tests, not based necessarily on what someone needs, but based necessarily on the profit margin of that test, paying for that machine. And we know what's going on. We know the state of Oregon has looked at this and passed legislation to stop private equity companies from doing this. And yet here we have in Pennsylvania, where we have seen firsthand these 4 hospitals be shut because of the greed of the private equity companies. We have Republicans in Harrisburg who say, yeah, it's a crisis, but they're not willing to do anything.
And it's just infuriating to me when you hear people bash Medicaid, Medicare programs like that have an overhead of less than, say, 3%. I think that's what it is. It's very small, and there isn't, and they're fairly efficient. They could always be better, but they do a decent job. And then when people say, well, the free market system works the best. Meanwhile, if the company that owns it doesn't decides you don't need that test, you're not getting it, despite that's what your doctor said. It's confounding to me. It's horrendous, but that's where we are. We've let this happen.
Well, the free market, in my experience as a consumer of healthcare, has things like $316 insulin in it. It has things like machines that you could use at home that you can't use at home if you don't have insurance because they cost $500 a day to rent.
Yeah.
It's hospitals in rural areas where the cows outnumber the people being shut down, and those people having to figure out how they're going to get health care in an emergency when the next hospital is 2 hours away.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right. Many economists believe that Milton Friedman is, the be all and end all. But even Milton Friedman said, if a criminal says your money or your life, it's a choice, but it's not a free choice. Yeah. Markets can only work on free choice. Right. And if it's insulin or die, it's not a free choice. The free market cannot work. We know that. We learn it. We know it. And somehow we manage to ignore it.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, and we will be back with Stan Shapiro next week here on Hall Monitor.